Hello, and welcome back to the Librarian of the Rings. Today we are going to be talking about how magic the Dwarves of Middle-earth really are, specifically in The Hobbit. Welcome back, my name is Ben, I'm the Librarian, and today we're talking about magic in Middle-earth, and specifically magic and dwarves. Now, when we talk about magic in Middle-earth, it's always a little bit confusing maybe, because magic is not really defined very well by Tolkien, and especially in contrast to other fantasy series, looking at you, Brandon Sanderson, it can be really tricky to kind of pin down what magic is. And I think if you went and you talked to people about magic in Middle-earth, a lot of people would mention the wizards, specifically Gandalf, and a lot of people would probably mention the elves as well. It's particularly probably Galadriel and maybe Elrond. I don't think very many people would mention dwarves, but as it turns out, dwarves in Tolkien's works are actually quite associated with magic a lot of the time. And the place where I wanted to start looking at this was The Hobbit, because The Hobbit is where we get the most interaction with dwarves. There are a lot of dwarves in The Hobbit, and we interact with them throughout almost the entire story. So this is really our best kind of data set on dwarves. Once we get to The Lord of the Rings, there's not so much about dwarves. There are some stories about dwarves in the Silmarillion, but not nearly as close as we are in The Hobbit. So I did a little textual analysis here to look at some words that are associated with magic and see how those words are associated with the different peoples of Middle-earth. So I lined it up with the peoples of Middle-earth, the elves, the dwarves, the Min, the hobbits, and the Istari. I chose to use the Istari because once we get into other works, we're going to have other kind of associations besides just Gandalf. But in The Hobbit, while Radagast is mentioned, we never actually see him or hear anything about him doing any kind of magic. So we use the Istari here in our graphs, but just know that for The Hobbit, it's all kind of Gandalf. I also looked at other references to magic because not everything is associated with a people. Particularly in The Hobbit, there's a lot of references to magic with Bilbo's ring. So I just kind of kept those aside. There's also some references to magic that aren't really associated with a particular group of people. There are a number of references to enchantment with Beorn, and we don't really know what Beorn is except that he's a skin changer. We don't really know how human he is, so those are kind of hard to pin down. And then we also have a number of references to kind of blanket enchantments that we don't know who they're associated with, particularly in Mirkwood. So I put those into an other category. Okay, so within this textual analysis, what did I find? Well, when I used just forms of the word magic, spells, and enchantments, then I found that the dwarves really came out on top for this group. They came out with 14, whereas elves came out with 11, and Gandalf just came out with 6. So the dwarves came out definitely on top of that. A lot of these specific references actually have to do with doors, which was really interesting. The secret door in the mountain is mentioned as being enchanted or being magic several times, as well as the gates of the Elven King in Mirkwood. Those are also talked about as being magic several times. When we looked at it this way, dwarves were on top and Min had nothing, and hobbits actually had a negative rating because there's one reference to hobbits with magic, and it is to say that they don't have any except basically an everyday sort of magic that helps them hide from people. Dwarves and elves definitely on top along with Gandalf. Now if we add in a few more words here to kind of look at other things that might reference magic, words like sorcery or bewitchment or incantation, then that does bring Gandalf up to 9 because he has one of each of those words, and the dwarves aren't associated with them at all. Now textual analysis can be really helpful, of course, but it does often leave something out because we can't always pick up everything with textual analysis. And in this case, we know there are a bunch of times that Gandalf is doing magical things where these words just aren't associated with it. Prime examples would be when he has the burning pine cones in the fight with the goblins, and when he does the flash of lightning in the goblin cave, as well as things like his smoke rings, which are able to chase other smoke rings around the room. So there's definitely these times. Now the dwarves have some of these as well. The prime example here would be the moon letters, which are clearly magical but don't have the word magic associated with them in the text of The Hobbit. So it's not all completely cut and dry just by looking at the numbers, and I would say that definitely Gandalf is the most magical in The Hobbit. But the dwarves definitely come in next. Now part of that might be just the amount of time that we're spending with them. When we look at a book where we have more association with the elves, I imagine we'll find a lot more references to elf magic, but elves also deal with magic very differently. You'll remember that Galadriel doesn't really understand what the hobbits even mean when they are talking about magic. Regardless, what we can see here is that dwarves are strongly associated with magic and definitely have the ability to do magic themselves. We see dwarves in the Hobbit talking about casting spells, being able to enchant things. There's definitely something about the dwarves that is inherently magical on their own. Now, as we go forward, I don't expect to see this borne out in The Lord of the Rings, because in The Lord of the Rings, we really only have Gimli as kind of the representative of the dwarves, and so we won't expect to see this trend really continue into The Lord of the Rings, in large part just because we don't have as much association with dwarves there. When we get to the Silmarillion, it will be interesting to see what happens, because there are a few stories in the Silmarillion that deal with dwarves, where dwarves kind of intersect with elves or with the Min that the Silmarillion is looking at, and their association with magic there is definitely going to be interesting. So stay tuned for another video looking at that a little bit later on. And that's going to do it for me today. Now, I would love to hear from you. Drop down in the comments and let me know what you think about dwarves and magic in Middle-earth. And until next time, farewell wherever you fare. May your ears receive you at your journey's end.